So it's so interesting. I get flack from both sides of the aisle. Latin Mass, technically, well, let's define it first because it's kind of like this weird ethereal concept. Um, the traditional Latin Mass, in its most simple form, back in the 1960s, the Vatican decided that they needed to more properly connect people with the liturgy. Right? It was very, very passive. You go in, you sit there, the Mass happens, you're in the building. Right? That's pretty much it. And a lot of times we look at the Latin Mass and think of it as the speaking in Latin, obviously, and the bells and the smells and the incense and all of the fanciness of the church. That rarely occurred before 1960. That was for like high feasts, especially in England, coronations. That was it. For most of the time, it was the Mass happens, you go in. There are some other things in older forms of the Mass, even. You would have the deacon holding up his cloak so that you couldn't see what was actually happening when the priest was transubstantiating the Eucharist because you weren't knowledgeable to understand what was happening. You were not worthy to see it. And so there were a lot of different little tiny things like that where the Vatican decided we need to engage people more with the faith because, to your point, it was becoming just a lifestyle accessory, right? The best example, another great example would be mobsters in New York, right? It's like, oh, whack a guy on Friday, go to confession Saturday, in the pew Sunday. It's like, I don't think you have total and utter transformation of self and being there, boss. And so the Latin Mass was, after Vatican II, changed the Mass into being more engaging with the people. So Mass became in the common vernacular. It was technically still Latin Mass. It was just in the language of the people of that region. They changed some of the prayers. They created a 3-year cycle of readings that every single Catholic church in the world will say the same readings on the same day, which is so cool. The Latin Mass was permitted, or the extraordinary form of the Latin Rite was still permitted, because they're like, well, some people still want to do it. That's fine as long as they're properly trained. That's okay. In recent times, there's been more of a resurgence back to that. I think primarily because of exactly what you're talking about, this issue where people are looking for something deeper and meaning, and they want something that's new and different. And so when you see something that feels like it has meaning or gives you the feeling of purpose or intention behind it, then you're going to absolutely flock towards that because that is something that you're more connected with or you feel like has more to it. And so I think that there's a resurgence in the Latin Mass because people are saying, I feel like there is something more here because we're giving more reverence to it. Now, that being said, the Latin Mass has kind of become its own thing. It's kind of shifted in some ways away from the pre-1964 rite. It's become, they'll do incense at every Mass or stuff like that, right? So it's not entirely super traditional. Also, the tradition, the Mass has changed like 15, 20 times since the Apostles. And the version that we have today is closest to that of the Apostles, which is pretty cool. I can go into that for hours, but I won't. And so I think it really is the same indicator as how we have worldwide record Bible sales going on right now. People are saying, I get this. I connect with this. I want to understand, and I want to have something that connects with me so that I am able to fulfill that inner desire for transformation. So I think that the Latin Mass isn't really the answer. I think it's more so people flocking towards it is indication of the symptom of what is really happening, of the desire that people have to not just make Mass and faith and spirituality even a lifestyle thing. I think they want it to be fully them. It's a part of their life. It's who they are. It's not just an accessory.